Welcome, everyone. I'm Vijay Vaitheeswaran. I'm the Global Energy and Climate Innovation Editor of The Economist. It's my great pleasure to be your immoderate moderator for today's session, hosted by Economist Impact and supported by Hitachi. So we're very grateful to them for their support. Our topic is Powering the Age of Electricity, Energy Security, AI, and the Future of the Grid. I'm delighted to invite my speakers to the stage. Please, I think, are we missing Jason? Where did we? Oh, there we are. Come this way. Please come and join us. Let me invite my speakers to the stage to come and be seated. Yes, that's great. Thank you. Please sit here, Karen. I will introduce them in turn, and we'll give them a round of applause to get them going. Today we're going to discuss in a little bit of a provocative fashion, because there's no shortage of sessions, I think you would agree, on AI. Hands up, how many of us have attended more than one session on AI already at Davos? Okay. How many of us have attended more than 10 sessions in the last 12 months on AIs? Okay, right. So I'm going to ban the use of the letters AI in the first 15 minutes of this discussion. We'll get into it. You can use euphemisms, but you call it a banana if you want. But we're going to talk about what powers AI and the issues that come from the broader questions of living in the age of electrification. If the 20th century was a century of oil, as it was in many ways, this is surely the age of electricity. Now, the energy nerds in the room will immediately say it's a final fuel. You need to make it from something. What's the primary energy? We know. But from the perspective of thinking about the system, the grid, of investment, of energy security, of sources, of supplies, of combustion, of emissions, of greenhouse gases, ultimately, the great Amory Lovins, an energy thinker many of you may know, who predicted some of the important trends in the last 50 years, taught me, even though he was a great advocate for energy efficiency, for thinking differently about energy, what ordinary people care about is cold beer and hot showers. Nobody thinks about electricity or oil or fuel or energy. And so if we think about it from the user's point of view, and in this case, if we think about it more generally from the consumers, from the taxpayers, or from the system point of view, that is, what is the value of energy to the system? Then we might come up with different answers than if we begin advocating specific technologies or fuels or drill, baby drill, or supply versus thinking more broadly about efficiency, flexibility, and how to get better outcomes. So that's my challenge to my expert panel, to think differently, give us a provocation. We've all been to loads of panels like this, so we want some fresh thinking here on the Economist stage. And I would be remiss if, without, on that note about fresh thinking, I just want to mention we have a special offer for those of us who are here in Davos from Economist Pro. My colleagues are offering 60 days as a special trial. You'll see red flyers around at the cocktail tables and inside the Economist copies that are available. This is for you to try the Economist, talk about fresh thinking. We've been here 185 years, still providing you the freshest thinking around. So please check it out. We encourage you to give it a try. Let me introduce my panel without any further ado. Going in to my left, to your right. First, Jason Bordoff, who's the founding director of the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. We have we have Karen Fang, who's managing director, global head of infrastructure and sustainable finance, as well as co-head of global capital solutions at Bank of America. That's a lot of hats you're wearing there, so we're going to expect a lot from you, Karen. We have Bernard Gustin, chief executive of Elia Group. We have Aaron Zubaty, who's chief executive and founder of Eolian. And we have, of course, to my far left, Andreas Schierenbeck, Chief Executive, Hitachi Energy. Again, welcome to all of you experts. Give them another round of applause. Get them going. And if you hear what you like in the course of our conversation, let them know. Let's make this interactive. And I will come to you for audience questions, so be sure, in Economist style, I have some good questions for them, not long-winded speeches. Nobody likes that. Make it good questions, but we'll come to you for that in due course. So maybe we'll start with you. Jason, you're a big geopolitical thinker. You and a co-author recently had a piece in Foreign Affairs that created a stir talking about the return of the energy weapon. And in a matter of days, it seemed like there was a military action in Venezuela, and suddenly the oil is now being diverted to a different direction. So how did you know, first of all? And maybe more seriously, tell us, how do we think about energy security in a rapidly changing world of geopolitics, but also of energy itself towards the age of electrification?
Thanks, Vijay, and thanks to The Economist for the invitation. I'm not paid to say you should take him up on the offer, because The Economist I just look forward to every week, and talking to a lot of energy reporters. In all seriousness, Vijay is one of the deepest thinkers and smartest minds I know on energy. So you should be a panelist as well as a moderator all the time, and always appreciate our conversations. Look, there's nothing new about the intersection of energy and geopolitics, but historically that has mostly meant oil and gas and globally traded hydrocarbons that are vulnerable to all sorts of geopolitical risks and supply disruptions and conflict around the world and maritime transit. And the point my co-author Megan O'Sullivan at Harvard and I made in this foreign affairs piece was that we've had about a half century now where energy security has receded to some extent in the agenda relative to the energy transition, which still remains very important and we should not lose sight of. We'd had, and a variety of reasons for that. We had in the US flat electricity demand for 20 years. We had an unprecedented surge in oil and gas supply through the shale revolution that created a lot of comfort in global oil and gas markets, meant more than 90% of the growth in demand. And relatively copacetic geopolitics, a period of openness and cooperation and globalization. And all of those factors are being thrown into reverse today. Power sector needs are rising rapidly. Shale will probably be flat this year. The kind of 1 million barrels per day per year of growth is no more. And we're in a totally different geopolitical environment, as we're seeing literally day to day in the news while we're all sitting here in Davos, the rules-based global order that has prevailed and to great benefit of global peace and stability, and I think to US power, is rapidly deteriorating. And in a world of geopolitical competition and conflict and fragmentation and rivalry, energy security is back top of the agenda. Oil and gas remains true to that, Venezuela, Iran, but increasingly electricity is at the center of that as well. And that both as a solution and as a risk. So for many parts of the world, not all, but for some that are worried about energy insecurity in a world of greater geopolitical competition, what do you want to do? You want to produce more domestic energy. And for lots of parts of the world, Europe being the prime example, that probably is going to mean a desire to have more things that are electrified. And then you want that electricity to come from domestic sources like renewables and nuclear. Reduced trade in energy is perceived as increasing energy security. But doing that brings a host of additional risks that now need to be addressed. Energy security risks to a more electrified world. Which are flexibility in the grid. The IEA has said flexibility is the new watchword of energy security. A world that becomes over time more electrified will have more cross-border electricity trade. It creates a whole different set of vulnerabilities. You can't store months' worth of supply in strategic reserves as easily with electricity. And it means heavy dependence on lots of parts of the electricity and clean energy supply chain in which certain countries, particularly China, have quite a dominant role. And how to think about supply chain risk in the context of electricity in this world of great power competition is a whole set of new challenges that countries are trying to actively figure out how to de-risk against.
So we're trading one set of risks for perhaps a different set of risks. Is your sense that the new risks are greater and less manageable? Or do you feel that as we move towards a world of this electrification and maybe less of that oil-centric world of the past, that there are lessons we can learn from the IEA, strategic stocks, from the role of interdependence, as well as thinking about financing models that are advanced? And of course, the banana, I promised I wouldn't use for the first 15 minutes, that new technologies and innovations might actually allow us to manage the newer risks in a more thoughtful fashion.
Yeah, I think the risk is certainly manageable. And so countries that were heavily dependent on oil imports and memories of the oil crises of the 1970s, those are harder risks to mitigate against in many respects. And so these are different. Supply chain risks are different than molecule risk. If you have a daily flow of 100 million barrels of oil per day and that is disrupted, you have significant impacts to your economy. If you see, how do people think about imports of solar panels that are made cheap in part because China dominates manufacturing? If you were to have a disruption in supply chains, there would be backlogs and delays in installing new solar panels. but that's not the flow of electricity. The electricity is still operating. These are also manufactured products, so it is possible to do that manufacturing in different places. It may be more costly. We may need to pay some insurance or security premium, but it is possible. The same with critical mineral refining and processing. Those are facilities that can be built. It's not a natural resource endowment that exists in some places.
It's possible to imagine a longer-term future that is, in fact, more resilient and
I think
more
in the
robust.
long run, a more electrified economy is a more energy secure economy. I just think there are challenges between here and there that if we don't navigate them are going to make it harder to move to that electrification future.
Well, great. That's a fantastic frame, and as well, sort of a nice look ahead to the sunlit uplands, as Churchill would have called it. But on the way there, we have some people who are very deeply involved in some of the challenges of the transition. I can see from the smiles in the room, some of you are also involved in the actual battles and challenges. Karen, you're on the, of course, a finance guru. You're deep in the thicket of energy infrastructure financing. That's one of the pillars that we need to conquer or overcome, as it were, depending on if it's an obstacle or a enabler. How do you see this question of the electrification age, how quickly we're rushing towards it, and what are some things you can propose that we should be doing in terms of dealing with the risks involved?
Yeah, sure. So I think, as Jason said, and as you sort of outlined in your opening, I definitely think the gravity has shifted towards, from sustainability to security, energy security and affordability, right? So people, if you look at the community approval process in the US right now for bananas, and you will see that they are truly like bananas because people are worried about surging power costs, people are worried about water, people are worried about pollution, air, and all of the above. And meanwhile, all these permitting processes really, it should be faster, but it's not, right? So when you think about, banana dominance is energy dominance, you kind of need both to go hand in hand. And what we're observing from the front line is that, the banana is actually creating a lot of tailwind for renewable power, which is truly cheaper and cleaner. And, in terms of commercial case that's been made, solar plus storage, for example, by far is the largest portion of our energy financing pipeline.
And that continues to be true, right?
Continues to be true in the US and globally.
And despite the American administration's shift in policy, if we put it politely, from the Biden era to the Trump era, according to the U.S. Department of Energy statistics, overwhelmingly new electricity generation investment in 2025 was clean energy.
And we're seeing that.
Yeah.
And I think it's because the commercial case is made and it's faster. Construction time frame is 12 to 18 months, and you can see that power, whether it's behind the meter or grid connected, is actually truly performing, the role that it should be performing for you. Maybe no more offshore wind if you're tracking the litigations. It's super fascinating.
Sure.
No one is trying to build new ones. We're just trying to finish the ones that we're building. But onshore wind is still happening too, right? And storage, I'm sure Aaron will talk about it, storage has become a really, really important piece of the pie. And I think the diversification is the name of the game, because we need energy of all forms, right? You can't afford to try to have a, technology strategy without having a power strategy, and the power strategy can't just be. Coal is still declining, right, as a percentage of our generation capacity. So you see a lot of gas, but then supply chain is becoming a real constraint. Backlog. I'm sure Andreas can talk about this. Supply chain backlog and delays are real. Right, you just can't get your hands on gas turbines and what have you. So what we're seeing is renewables are still actually receiving the tailwind, propelling forward. We're seeing a lot of financing going there, and we're seeing gas power plant financing for sure, but the gas electron won't come online for another 3, 4, 5 years.
Well,
nuclear,
try to get a new turbine from GE Vernova, it's a 4 to 5 year wait list.
That's right. And then you look at nuclear, that's probably the biggest change compared to a year ago. We have a lot more nuclear conversations, fission and fusion, right? Obviously, on the fission side, supply chain, could be waste management, it could be just fuel, could be what have you, that supplies to a Westinghouse AP1000 and try to construct that into a power plant. All of that is showing that people are definitely trying to diversify, but we have to observe real world constraints, whether it's supply chain, whether it's EPCs, labor, and all of the above.
So we're seeing finance adapt and new kinds of financial actors as well. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but for example, even some of the big tech companies, Google's deal for Intersect, some of you would have noticed, and we're seeing new pools of capital from the private markets coming in. So we're seeing some adapting, but equally we still see choke points and bottlenecks. I want to come to that because again, the grid really is a fundamental enabler of what is to come, and yet we've seen woeful underinvestment. The average age of the grid is in Europe and America is measured in decades. In France, last I checked, it was 50 years on average, but certainly 30 to 40-year-old grids and distribution lines as well. And so getting the right models for investment, and as that mix moves ever greater towards decarbonized forms of energy, it creates new kinds of challenges. And we have a couple of experts in this who are practitioners, but also very knowledgeable. I'm very pleased to come to. And here I'm going to release my hold on the word bananas, because you're welcome to use the word, talk about AI from now on. We did our job of not belaboring the point, but also because I want to point out that for many years I've been using the phrase bananas to reflect something else, that is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody syndrome. And that's the bananas that I think we see in Europe. Bernard, let's come to you. Trying to build new, there's years and years of wait for a queue to get new power plants or new equipment on. Can you tell us again, with the filter of energy security, the age of electricity, where Europe stands? And you have a unique vantage point because you are a grid operator in Germany and Belgium. I've been to your facilities in Berlin, 50 hertz. And the day I was there a couple of years ago, it was more than 60% renewables on the grid, and you were managing them perfectly safely and effectively, which shows those skeptics who think that you cannot have safe reliability with high degrees of penetration, but you need to do it carefully and with different kinds of approaches and technology and culture. So tell us a little bit about the challenge as you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, about 5-6 years ago, the grid was the rather easy part of the value chain. The current was going one direction. The quantity was the same all the time. You negotiated with the regulators every 3 years about a return for the coming 3 years. Rather easy. And if I take my group, Elia Group, we were investing year in, year on around 700 to 800 million a year. This year, we're going to invest 7 billion. Next year will be more, and it will continue like that over the coming years to succeed the energy transition, not only in terms of quantum, but also in terms of complexity, because basically we have the integration of renewables, we have the bananas AI integration as well, which is for us a solution and a problem, because it requires a lot of energy. And in order to do that, we do not only have, and I think we need other financing, we need, of course, to perform on our side, but the whole framework needs to change. And that's my key concern today. By the way, we are trying also to develop in the US, but in the US or in Europe, how do we change the framework in terms of permitting, in terms of regulation, in terms of collaboration? Today, we're still country-to-country approach. Europe, and I take two examples. Europe has decided that the North Sea would become a power plant. Great idea. But if we do it country per country and everybody has to negotiate costs between the two countries, won't work. We need a regional planning. We need to have a canvas. We need to let the country negotiate, because if we try to do it with 27 countries, that won't work. But we need to have a canvas on how do we do that. We have at 50 Hertz an island between Germany and Denmark. But how do we make sure that the Danes are ready to invest in renewable they don't actually need to support Germany that is short in renewable? Well, that's another canvas than the usual two countries, two regulators, two legislation. And so my point is that we really, next to the operational challenge, the supply chain challenge, the financing challenge, we need to start to think also about the framework. Good news in Europe is that we have the grid package. So for Europe, they've really integrated that it was an issue. Challenge, the grid package remains high-level theoretical, needs to be translated into reality by the countries. That's the complexity of Europe.
At the high level, it calls for a significant increase in investment.
Absolutely.
In the grid. And that, I think most reasonable people agree that's long overdue.
Support, more central planning, which makes sense as well, but we shouldn't go the whole way, because otherwise nothing will happen.
Well, I think our next speaker may have a view on central planning, but we'll get to that.
And I'm prudent on that, because I think we should be better coordinated, organized, but if we try to get the 27 countries aligned, nothing will happen.
Sure, yeah.
Faster permitting, which is also very important for us, because we see that projects went beyond the budget big time because there was too much uncertainty. We have also an activity of developer. Very difficult to invest in DevEx when you don't know whether the project will happen, of course, and when you have so much uncertainty. We have some cases.
So listen, I'm going to push you, as I will all of us on stage, to be practical. What is a practical solution or proposal or way forward on this terrible problem of waiting years and years in a queue, and it turns out a number of the projects may be vaporware or not legit. And so, do you have a proposal on,
Yes.
on what to do about that?
Well, very easy. First, today the rule is first come, first serve. We need to move through first ready, first serve. Because today, whoever has a project, even without a dime to start a project, if he's first in the queue next to another one, he needs to be analyzed, and he needs to be analyzed by us first. And that means that the real projects are beyond. 2, we need to have a system by which we get rid of all the zombie projects. Because we have today, in terms of data centers or in terms of batteries, projects that are approximately 6 times more than what is needed. So that means that we have a series of projects that will never happen, but we cannot discriminate. Just that rule would be already a big change.
Okay, so I like the sound of it, but the devil's in the details. Who decides? Am I a zombie or am I a developer and worthy of support? I'm a risk taker. So let's turn to our next speaker. Aaron, you have a lot of experience with this. You've taken on a lot of risk over the years. You're one of the leading developers of energy storage and other technologies in the US. Give us your perspective on how you see the call for more coordination, central planning, and more generally the question of energy security in the US grid.
I think it's super dangerous, and all the things you just said. It opens up mass corruption. It opens up the ability to pick winners and losers. Every single time we've seen this happen in the US, going from what I would describe as an imperfect serial queue to let's just mush it all together. You have a couple big utilities basically deciding everything. Now, as someone who's fought, scrappy for 20 years against utilities, and the way things have been done, I think that's really problematic. And the reason why is...
But before you do, give people a sense of how big you are. They may think you're some guy with 2 cents in your pocket.
Well, we did.
How much energy
I started as, the proverbial guy in a pickup. We've developed 30 gigawatts of wind and solar. We have 3.5 gigawatts of energy storage now, built and operating in the US. It took 20 years to build that up. Another 50 gigawatts of pipeline, et cetera, all across the country. But the key was that markets, the utility domination, and again, I mean no intentional disrespect, but single focus domination of planning and control of a grid started to get unwound through deregulation. I was imperfect. A lot of rules didn't anticipate what was coming, but it gave us the ability to say, if your rules look this way, then we will find technological solutions to make it work better than you are doing it today. And that's why wind and solar first came on the grid in the US. That's why energy storage really has taken off. In many cases, unintentional market reforms that opened the door for us to sort of go way, way in. I would say in Texas, what's happened there, there's almost 20 gigawatts of energy storage operating in Texas, which is insane. There's no mandate. All it was unintentional market rules that were, again, unintentionally had an amount of foresight to say an electron is an electron, doesn't matter what color, doesn't matter what did it, and if you can do it with speed and efficiency, you're going to benefit. So again, the sort of Wild West, market opening that happened in the US really did enable a lot of technological change. At the same time, to go back to how much investment is needed, there's a lot of spare capacity. That's become clear, I'd say, in the last year. There's a huge amount of spare capacity in the grid. I would challenge that the problem is not investment. And I say this because, again, I'm fighting these people day and night. The reality is the regulatory models incentivize investment. They do not incentivize the efficient use of what exists. It is a failure globally at this point because every single utility says, there's a problem over here. My incentive is to build to solve that problem every time. And you can't blame them. That's the way we've set the compact up. Unwinding that and changing that immediately will open up hundreds of gigawatts in Europe and the US almost immediately if you let them profit from being efficient. Today, they don't. And that has been a huge, huge thing that we've fought.
So that's a question of market design, am I right? And system design. As you rightly say, most grids are designed for 20 hours a year, something like that, for peak. And there's a lot of fallow in both the transmission as well as the distribution systems. Let me come to you, Andreas. You have deep knowledge because your company's involved in all these markets and you're involved with a lot of the companies providing the essential infrastructure. How do you see this question that's just been put on the table about the role of transmission. There's clearly a need for more investment, but not necessarily looking in the rearview mirror, maybe a different type of investment. Where do you think the bets will take you and the future grid and the future energy system if we keep one eye on the kinds of drivers of growth of electrification and as well on the kinds of things that are affecting security we talked about, the need for flexibility and adaptability, greater penetration of new kinds of energy. Where do you think we should go?
That's a good question because the role of the grid is, from my point of view, dramatically changing. Years ago it was just there, it was not completely utilized because it was built decades ago, but it was sufficient. Now a lot of things have changed. You explained that, of course, the grid is now used in a different way. You say that the market rules are done for a different world, and I agree with you. And on the other hand, energy is becoming a weapon. Electricity, yes, is the move to electricity to electrons is exactly as you said, Jason, because I want to de-risk it. Whatever I can do with electrons instead of molecules, I'm doing it because I have multiple sources, which means the electrical grid now is becoming more important than it becomes a target. So cyber attacks, redundancy, better utilization, make it more sturdy and rigid in the use of that. That's all new actually, and that's probably not many utilities have thought about it, not many companies have thought about it. The sign rules are not adequately equipped to that. So there's a lot of new things coming to us. On the other hand, I'm sitting a little bit in the middle. Of course, more equipment is better for me because I could sell more, but unfortunately I'm full. I couldn't even sell more. So actually using what we have in a better way and adapting the market rules probably would help. You said make it practical.
Yeah.
If you buy a new transformer as a utility, you get compensated for that.
Right.
If you maintain the transformer, you get compensated for that. Leasing, you're not getting compensated for that. But if you take a transformer which is 30 years old and refurbish it, that it lasts another 20 years or works better, you're not getting compensated for that, right?
Right.
So that's where I say we have to move on all of these needles and wheels to make the step into the future.
It's a really good point about that, the incentive structure, right? The market rules. We've heard multiple times reconductoring or grid enhancing technologies, as that category is called broadly, is less attractive than the old joke in the utility business than redecorating the chairman's office, right? Again, no offense. I'm sure you have a humble office. It's not at all gold-plated in any way. No gold toilets there. But nevertheless, I wonder if you'd take on this challenge on rules.
Oh, sure. And you might be surprised, but I might agree with Aaron on one point. I think the system by which you're incentivized by the more you invest is not the right one. I fully agree with you. But happily, if I take my group, which is stock listed, at some point we come in a level of capex where we can't finance it anymore. And so that means you have happily a natural limit. And we've come to a point, and the message I give to my team, if we want to make the transition affordable and financeable, we need to reduce the capex growth. It cannot go to the roof. And secondly, flexibility will be necessary. So I think we don't fully disagree in there. There is an evolution, but we need to have the regulations and so on allowing for this flexibility and rewarding for this flexibility.
Can you give us a definition? Because not everyone is a deep energy expert in the room. This is a Davos crowd. And so I'll give the two of you a chance. What does flexibility mean to you?
Flexibility means that some users don't need the grid all the time, and you don't have to give them access to the grid all the time, for example. That it's contractual foreseen. Flexibility means that you use the different tools at disposal to basically maximize the usage of your grid, and you don't build a grid for peak usage.
So it can mean time shifting, for example. Aaron, what does it mean to you? Because batteries are a perfect use case or a provider of flexibility. Give us something specific.
As an example, we built, we're finishing construction of a 400 megawatt, 5-hour battery in Texas at the most critical choke point on the grid on purpose to show that you actually don't need to build new transmission lines, because when you have congestion there, we can actually solve that congestion. So not only is it a physical...
Just give us the next sentence. Yeah. And you'll solve that congestion by what? By releasing the energy you stored that you got when it was cheaper, presumably.
That automatically, as frequency or voltages shift slightly, within 250 milliseconds, 400 megawatts can be deployed onto that grid, which is the equivalent of 4 747s taking off in 250 milliseconds. That speed is not valued or rewarded whatsoever in any market design to that degree. And the location is also not, because if you value certain locations, you say, well, that location turns out to not be as valuable. And that's a slippery
So
slope. It's
locational
dangerous.
pricing
So
is
location-
something which the UK doesn't want to do, but is a debate in that country. Could be something also to look at. Yes, you come in quickly, and then I'll come back for a bigger thought.
Because you asked for being
No,
practical.
please. Yeah, I know you know a
This is
lot
a very
about this.
practical example because probably not all of us are energy experts. So Bernard has a problem. Everybody can ask for a grid connection. Doesn't matter if you have the money or if the project is
Or
there.
where they are.
You just put the paper in. So I want to have a 300 megawatt connection for a solar park, which means he has to do it in the sequence of the order. If the grid connection is 500 megawatts, only 300 megawatts get connected, the 200 are just waste because he cannot connect 2 customers to that switch part.
Right.
So it means he cannot even take a decision that another project with 500 megawatts could be connected because it would be more efficient because this project is back in the pipeline. If you cannot even think about a battery guy saying, look, this is a solar field of 300 megawatt, which probably is not producing at midnight. Maybe the battery guys have an incentive to take the energy during the day and selling it overnight and combining that. So combining a battery and a solar project together is not working. It's not allowed. So you're wasting 200 or 300 megawatts because it's only one customer. You're not combining it, but the capex is there for the maximum capacity, which is just waste. And that's flexibility, which makes it cheaper, makes it more affordable, and more secure probably as well.
Can I say one more? There's
Yeah.
another
Go
type of flexibility, which I would describe as regulatory flexibility. So I'll give an example. ERCOT.
Isn't that an oxymoron?
Well, exactly. And that's the problem, is that there's no incentive for it. No one wants to be the person on watch who allows for another Texas or Spain type of event. And so there's this inherent risk aversion that now exists in grid operations. But when I talk about operational flexibility, on the hottest day of the year, under certain conditions, we know that there's a 2-hour period that's the worst period. And there are certain constraints you could release grid operationally to get through that. Most grids will not let you do that. Basically, the grid operates blind most of the time so that you could have all these elements fail as if we're still in 1950 and don't have the same level of real-time monitoring that we have today. So there's a whole other level of flexibility that could just be operational, situational flexibility that allows you to not trap energy a lot of the time that today you're forced to by NERC rules or the equivalent elsewhere.
And of course, we've seen some great academic work from Duke University and more recent work on how data centers themselves could be the source and supplier of flexibility. Absolutely. There are challenges to this. You can't take the argument too far, but at least in the Midwest of the U.S., Google has already entered into a deal to provide flexibility. That is, when the grid approaches overload, they'll take off some of their load from the system. And just shifting 1%, 2%, 3% during the moments of maximum crisis can often save the grid from either overload, blackouts or brownouts, or 10, 20, 30% on cost. Studies have shown repeatedly from EPRI and other economic studies. So there's a real potential there. But in my experience, big tech has historically been resistant to this. Maybe because there's not much of a financial incentive, or maybe there hasn't been enough of regulatory push. We can debate that another time. But yeah.
It's the history of the energy sector. You mentioned Amory Lovins in your opening.
Yeah.
Who to this, doing a lot of writing in foreign affairs, and your goal is something that's lasting. And Amory's article from 1975, more than a half century ago, you read it today, it's remarkable how apt it is.
Yeah.
When he talked about coming out of the 1973 oil crisis, a hard path and a soft path. And the hard path was breaking rocks and building pipelines across Alaska and lots of things to extract more resources so that we could diversify. And for sure, we needed some of that. But there was a soft path, which is, as you said, nobody really cares how much oil comes out of the ground exactly. They care about whether they're getting the services that energy provides and how much more could be done with energy efficiency and things like that. He was opposed to nuclear, so he was wrong about that. But other than that, like a lot of, and largely we ignore those lessons, again and again and again. And we're seeing that now in the power sector, where the focus is permitting reform and build, baby, build, and how do we put more steel and pipes and wires, and we need that for sure. I'm not pretending we don't need to build more power generation, but in a world where there's a multi-year backlog, you can tell when people are going to get the next gas turbine and how long the wait is, and whatever most optimistic take you have on SMRs is sometime in the 2030s, and maybe we'll see. I see Commonwealth here when fusion might happen. So we'll do solar, but there's, as you said, we're not using half the grid most of the time, except for a few dozen hours per year. And so the ability to have demand response for data centers to be flexible with their demand, and I think storage, and we have people here doing like Antora doing really innovative stuff in storage, that's going to be massively important to meet the near-term needs that we see so we can use the generation capability we have more effectively.
And I'm going to come to you in a minute for a final word from the panel before we go to questions. But I want to alert my audience. We're coming out for Q&A. Please get some thoughts together. I think we have a microphone. Am I right? We do, so we'll wait for that. But please collect your thoughts and give us the financing perspective. Is what you're hearing sound like something that we can organize finance around, or does it sound like it's a mess and that this is something that you'd be hard-pressed to sell to your shareholders and backers?
The capital is not a constraint. So there's a lot more infrastructure capital. To your point, there's private equity, private credit. When bank construction loan market isn't available, it's not like we're seeing just dry up, financing dry up. We're seeing just more expensive financing coming online. So financing isn't necessarily the constraint. It's what type of financing. Can you get the really cost-effective bank construction loan and then bridge to securitization, bridge to sort of a long-dated rated project loan for insurance companies and pension funds? That was the old playbook. Right now, given the speed and scale, what we're observing literally is its unprecedented volume in a very short period of time. Forget about bankers processing the transactions. We're literally talking about digestion risk. On AI data centers with one particular hyperscaler is 75% of the project finance market in Q3 and Q4 2025. And all of a sudden, that dried up a lot of bank construction financing because you don't have the exit lined up, right? So then the bank capital is regulated and what have you. So when you have hiccups, you start having other projects in the pipeline coming online, which, by the way, may be renewables plus storage, but you still need firm power because most data centers need 4 nines, 99.9999% reliability. So you need some kind of firm 24/7 firm power. You can do renewables. I think a couple of things promising that you talked about, right? Because AI data center isn't just a sort of power, suck up power. It can also provide that flexibility to the grid, but you have to do it in a very orderly fashion, right? You have to think about AI's role. It's already performing, I think, quite efficiently in terms of predicting demand and predicting supply based on weather patterns and start balance the grid. That's actually being put in practice, right? So we can't just ignore the benefit of the technology that's actually providing more efficiency into the very, very old grid, but it needs a lot of efficiency upgrades.
Right, and not just the grid, but also even management of the grid and so on, but also in regulatory applications.
Absolutely.
And so on.
Absolutely. Permitting reform, and we're talking about how do we make that more efficient.
We're beginning early days
right.
to see the potential
and we're starting to
of AI.
finance DG solutions as distributed generation solutions. For example, the peak demand in our US grid, 75% is caused by HVAC. Right, for those 2 hours in the summer. So when you think about that, if everyone's HVAC can actually be combined with the storage, you can actually self-supply your AC needs until you need to pull from the grid. That seems like a pretty easy solution, and we're desperately trying to figure out a way to work with utilities and storage, and AC providers to actually kind of do all that together. Right? So those are interesting things that can balance the grid more, and we're seeing financing is not really the constraint, it's really the type of structures and cost-effective financing.
Great. Well, as someone whose first book on energy was called Power to the People, in effect, arguing the case, what you've just described, it was 20 years ago, by the way, it was published. I'm delighted to see that some of these ideas are slowly moving into the mainstream and maybe finding business models. On that note, let me come to my very brilliant audience here. Hands up, who'd like to ask a question? We see a quick hand up here. Let's get a microphone to the gentleman. Just a couple of ground rules, please. Tell us who you are and make it a question rather than a speech.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. My name is Felix Grollman. I run the VSB Group, a bit of the equivalent what you do in the US, but only 20 gigawatts, not 30, so a bit smaller. I think one of the key things you've said is about the regulation and the framework. And last week in Abu Dhabi, the European head of energy sort of said, look, everything you said, we need that, we're going to do that. How are we going to break that down on the national level? Because it's still fractured. Like only if the European Union wants it, it doesn't really work yet. So what's your kind of pretty much to everyone here. How do we get this to the national level, to the governments of Germany, of France? Poland is already much better than a lot of other countries. How do we make it actually work in practice?
Who's got a good answer for him?
Well, I think on my side, the good news is that there is such a need that the government cannot just stay silent and do nothing. So I think the positive business pressure will play a role. But it's clear that we need to really spend time advocating for the need, thinking about innovative solution and proposing innovative solution and changes, because these changes won't come from the regulators themselves. And it's not a criticism, it's just because they're in a world that is changing so fast and they haven't been adapted to that. But I think the business requirement should normally put sufficient pressure in there. But it's a challenge. We know how Europe is complex.
Can I
A quick point.
Because the Europe and US both, in a sense, I'll say America is also somewhat balkanized by different grids, different rules, so it's actually quite similar. The single most important thing globally that should be done is a standard design for power market design. And it needs to be basically promulgated immediately. Everyone needs to agree, if you need these things, this is how to design it, and everyone needs to say from this point forward, if you don't want it to get taken over, I don't know if you saw what happened in the US, last week, the governors and Trump said we're basically taking over the PJM power market. It is terrible. It is a bad, bad situation. If they say these markets aren't working and they're not moving fast enough, we're just going to have government intervene. That's not good. That's terrible, I think. So ultimately, what we have is a lot of failed market designs that haven't worked for various reasons. We're not going to go into it now. There is no standardized obvious. This is what works with everything we now know. And to be honest, it's the same in Europe and the US. The same should apply, 100%.
I'll add a small anecdote to this. Since the Iberian blackout, I've been on several continents at Economist events, and I've spoken privately with utility heads, heads of technology, grid management, and grid operators. And on 4 different continents, I got 3 different understandings of what went wrong and what they're going to learn, including from one of the largest utilities in the world, took what I thought were incorrect and partial lessons that suited their existing asset base and the way that they worked. They said, yeah, we got that, but we can't do that here, so we're not going to do that, they said about one important lesson. So I strongly advocate, maybe it's the IEA or maybe an expert group, EPRI, but some group of neutral folks who are technology experts, at least saying, here's a template. You need to be sure to do these things. And if you go beyond that or don't do these things, it's on you. This is not best practice. I think we have a microphone here in the 3rd row. Let's make them quick questions, quick answers, and I promise to come to the back. I see a hand in the back I'll come to in a moment. Go ahead.
Great. I'm Lars Bjørn. I'm CEO of a Danish grid operator and AI and flexibility operator. Just a comment on the timing issue, or question on the timing issue, because I think when we are even very positive, the way down on our organizations, their willingness, their ability to accommodate these new technologies is really weak. And the discussions we have with our TSOs and with TSOs throughout Europe is that the people are just not ready. So how do we educate for this?
Technical capacity?
Well, I've done all my career outside of TSOs and rather in heavily competitive markets. It's a major, that's my biggest challenge. I think we have a huge opportunity being multinational, stock listed, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's changing the mentality, and I can recognize some of the things you said. But happily, the demand is so big that we have to change. It's a cultural change. We need to move from an engineering culture to rather a functional culture. We need to explain that affordability and flexibility are as important as electrification. And that's part of the story. And it's really a day-to-day business. And I think, by the way, when we are, like we are at Elia Group, a stock-listed company, it helps as well, because we are basically accountable for our results. And we can immediately feel when it doesn't go right, which is not the case for many utilities.
Let's go to the back row. Quick question.
Yeah, this is Paul. I'm CEO of a small US-based AI development, energy development company called Voltscape. And PJM kind of triggered me to want to grab the mic because the question I have for the panel is, what about behind the meter and kind of this verticalization that's occurring? I'm developing 3 gigawatts of power in Pennsylvania, and it is not on the grid. And part of it is because of the challenges with the grid, the interconnect.
Is it a bring your own power situation, or are you actually going to rely on a backup grid connection?
I am buying a power plant that is on a peaker, shutting it down, and then it'll go towards my off-taker, which is one of the hyperscalers.
Any reflections on this? Andreas, you thought a little bit about the bring your own power concept. What do you think about that?
Well, it's something I see more and more, especially.
I mean, you win either way, right? They're going to buy your equipment one way or the other.
Yeah, from my point of view, it's transparent. I have to say the hyperscalers are faster because they are more open to standardization and accepting solutions without a lot of discussions,
Right.
Which is quite normal. But I see more and more that big hyperscalers, data center going off-grid or only barely connected to grid, so private networks and all these things, because they are just faster and they don't get the permission and the negotiations with the utilities, with the grid access. So that's the development I see. I haven't found the right opinion in my head if I think it's a good development or it's a bad development. It's good for the equipment sale, that's fine. But what does it mean to the industry? In which direction it works? I don't know yet, actually.
I mean, I think we've hit the key word already, affordability, right? You mentioned this.
Absolutely.
There's no question this is a key issue in certainly U.S. politics this year, but we've seen it with the Trump administration actions. We saw it with Microsoft's Brad Smith's press conference the day before, anticipating the president's news. That is, hey, we're not going to cost any of you a penny. We'll pay for the extra power that we're going to get, and we'll even give you more water than you had before we came here. In other words, don't blame us. And so wanting to try to take big tech out of the affordability political conversation. But there's something deeper than that as well. I think that because these companies do have sustainability commitments that they kept and continue to reaffirm. Let's see if they stand the scrutiny of the next 5 to 10 years. But at least for the moment, all of them are believers in climate change and say they're going to work on emissions reductions. You cannot achieve that simply by relying on whatever the grid provides you or taking over existing plants on the grid. And historically in the US, for example, big tech companies have been the biggest funders of clean tech, solar developed through, for example, the PPAs market that developed in the US a bit through support from these companies. So there is a bit of a historical precedent for financial innovation. So could it be that it's the Bank of Microsoft or Bank of Google that challenges you in this marketplace? Would you welcome that, or would you?
They could be very much welcome that. There could be the credit support for a lot of these transactions. And frankly, behind the meter is one efficient way. We've looked at a lot of different projects. We're financing behind the meter stuff. But I will tell you, the financing market does differentiate behind the meter that's plugged into the grid, with, essentially kind of for contingencies, and or you just overbuild on storage, overbuild on fuel cells, right? That's also very expensive. So it's a trade-off between cost and speed.
I'm going to do a lightning round. Let's get a question up here. I know there's a hand in the back that's been very enthusiastic. I'm slightly wary of people who are over-enthusiastic, but I'm going to trust that you're going to ask a good question. So we'll come to you first. Please tell us who you are. Quick question, and also we'll go to the back. Both questions will be fielded together. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Libby Wayman from Breakthrough Energy Ventures. Jason made a good point about molecule security being different from supply chain security, and I'm curious if the panel has thoughts on what supply chains truly are important to have geographic diversity in, and which ones are maybe like, it was a thought, but at the end of the day, we just care about cost.
Great. Good question. Yes, in the back.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Joy. I'm from the World Energy Council. So my question will be from an impact perspective and not really from a technological perspective. Having been coming from Abu Dhabi, where we had a lot of leaders from the global south, one of the major problems we talked about across my regional climb is the access to capital and then guarantees. So Karen here on the panel triggered this question I'm going to be asking. Now that the EU has taken Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and some other African countries out of the high-risk region, how is that going to really affect the power infrastructure investments towards the African region? Thank you.
Great, thank you. A very important question. So I'm going to see who wants to answer this. We're almost out of time, but Karen, since I was directed to you very specifically, maybe we'll start with that.
Sure.
We know that the cost of capital in developing countries has been phenomenally higher. There's a study, I think, by the Clean Air Task Force some months ago, talked about 15% weighted average cost of capital in Africa. Extraordinary to try to do, even though the greatest solar potential is there, the costs are so much higher because of perceived risks. Do you have an answer for our questioner?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of the sovereign level supported revenue stream PPA projects can get done, but the sovereign debt cost is still very expensive, to your point. We've done sovereign debt restructuring, Gabon and other countries, but more of those need to happen. The rest needs to rely on blended finance, right? When you think about African Finance Corporation, African Development Bank, EIBs of the world, there's definitely de-risking capital, World Bank, IFC. World Bank has 300 million people need to have access to power, all of those really, really great goals. I think the blended finance, honestly, the pace is slow. And it's because of the currency risk, it's because of the credit risk, it's because of the political risk. So we do have to acknowledge the fact that access to power is a just transition issue, and the capital is not flowing there as much as you can, and the Western capital, especially that's regulated, is still incurs a huge amount of capital charge. So it is not happening as fast as we like as well.
Let's take up the question that was put about molecule versus supply chain security. We'll come to you, Jason, maybe to give the closing comment, but anyone of my practitioners. Yeah, let's start with you, Andreas, and then we'll come to you. Yeah. Briefly, please, because we're almost out of time.
Coming to your question, I think it's always a kind of cycle. Normally, if you're in the energy business and you're buying molecules, you want to de-risk your sources, geographically, different kinds, whatever, because there can always be energy as a weapon, but as well there can be technical problems. The pipeline can be broken and you have to fulfill your commitments. Of course, if you're under cost pressure, you're trying to negotiate that away, and then we unlearn that there's a risk, and then we have an energy crisis, and then the whole cycle starts again. So there's no easy, perfect answer for that. I think it's like always in the banking and in the finance world, it's going up and down a little bit, right?
Aaron, you had a quick thought?
Yeah, batteries as an example, right? Lithium doesn't come from China, it comes from other places, copper as well, all the inputs. It's really about the processing.
Mostly refined and processed.
Yes, exactly. So the processing, I was in Peru over the holidays, looked at the mines, everyone there says, it's really a shame that Western countries have left us and our only option is to sell to China. So we caused it, we can fix it, we have to process.
And we have to pay.
There'll be a cost, but it's a choice, like you said. So do we want to end the cycle? We pay, and we build it, and we develop those facilities here or wherever.
Jason, you've looked at this a long time. How would you answer that question?
I'll say one comment about that and one on the kind of equity in the developing world. I mean, I think there's a lot of headwinds to the energy transition now, including what's happening with the administration in the United States where I live. But I think perhaps the greatest is how advanced economies come to perceive energy security risk in supply chains vis-a-vis China. I think what's happening now is a very broad, unnuanced conversation where there's kind of a blanket thrown out there that says if it's from China, it's bad in a world of great power competition. And so we need to set up restrictions and mandates and domestic content requirements and tariffs and just do that activity ourselves. And I don't think people fully appreciate the scale, the magnitude of the lead China has built in so many of these sectors, the extent to which that scaled manufacturing and innovation, frankly, has driven down costs, how costly it would be to try to replicate those supply chains elsewhere. And we're not having a nuanced conversation about what, to your question, like security risks really are and aren't. Like heavy rare earths with sensitive applications for military magnets is probably different than a solar panel. So we need to do a much better job of defining risks precisely and then figuring out how to de-risk them. One might be domestic manufacturing. I'm not sure we're going to put a bunch of refining and processing plants, if you visited them and seen what they look like in the US Gulf Coast. It's not going to be like super welcome there. There are other things you can do to de-risk dependence as well.
So resilience may involve a mix of autonomy and
strategic
thoughtful
stockpiles, diversification, working with allies, all of that. And just on the topic of sort of, we've focused so much on the banana and AI and power demand, it is important to sort of put that in context when we think about the global context and the need for investment in energy, power sector, electricity in most of the world. On the one hand, the numbers around the power sector and data centers are staggering, right? That in the last 5 years, we've seen electricity for data centers grow at an annual rate of 12%. But for comparison, when TVs were invented, they grew at 10% in the year. Like these are big numbers, and power demand for AI is going to double between now and 2030. It's still less than 10% of the growth in global electricity demand. The growth in air conditioning globally is going to consume more electricity than AI and data centers will. It's a huge challenge in certain places and concentrated regions.
Right.
But we need to make sure that we're providing financing and investing in the capability of the grid and electrification for much more basic needs in most of the developing economies.
Well, that's an important reminder and a good note to end on, that this is in fact a global topic going far beyond bananas. Don't go bananas, go beyond bananas. Let's call that as the takeaway from this session. I think you'll all agree that we've really benefited from both the big picture, but also the specifics and the frontline knowledge of our CEOs and executives and our financiers. Please join me in giving them a nice round of applause for their contribution.